The sky above Montana in late October looks like something that's been burned from the inside out. Not orange exactly, not red. Something older than either of those colors. A rust that the ancient rocks must have bled into the atmosphere over 1,000 years, painting everything it touches the color of something ending. I know that sky by heart now. I know what it means when it looks like that. It means the cold is coming. Not the comfortable autumn cold that makes people reach for sweaters and wrap their hands around warm mugs. The real cold. The kind that makes the horses uneasy 3 days before it arrives. The kind that the old-timers in Billings describe the same way they describe a difficult man. Not with specific words, but with a long exhale and a look that tells you everything. I've lived under that sky for 4 years. And in 4 years, I thought I had learned everything it had to teach me. I was wrong. His name was Nico, and he arrived on a Tuesday in the second week of September, driving a pickup truck that had clearly seen more states than it had repairs. With a duffel bag in the back, a jacket that was nowhere near warm enough for where he was going, and a smile that had absolutely no business being that easy in a place like this. I was fixing the water trough near the east gate when he pulled in. I heard the engine before I saw the truck, a tired, rattling sound that made me look up. Earl Halverson was already walking across the yard to meet him, which meant this was the seasonal hire he'd mentioned, the one coming up from Portland. I watched him climb out of the cab. He moved like someone who had learned to be comfortable in his own body without making a statement about it. Easy, unhurried. He looked around the property the way a person looks around when they're genuinely curious, not sizing things up, not calculating, just looking, the way a man looks at a landscape when he actually intends to be present in it. Then he looked at me. I looked back at the trough. My name is Connor Kelly. I'm 31 years old. I've worked the Halverson Ranch outside Billings, Montana for 4 years, and before that, I worked 2 ranches in Wyoming and 1 in Idaho, and before any of that, I had a life I don't talk about. That's not a mystery. It's just true. There are things that belong to the past and things that belong to the present, and I've always been careful about which ones I let cross that line. I'm not a man who speaks when silence will do. I'm not a man who reaches for things. I learned young, very young, in ways I'll tell you about later, that wanting something too much is the fastest way to lose it. So I became someone who didn't want too much. Someone who kept his hands busy and his eyes down and his chest quiet. 4 years on the Halverson Ranch, and I had managed that just fine. And then Nico arrived, and nothing was fine anymore. It was just more than fine, which is worse. The first week, we barely spoke. That was normal. New seasonal workers always go through an adjustment period, learning the routines, learning which horses need what kind of handling, learning how the other men on the crew operate. I watched him without watching him. That's a skill I have. I can be looking directly at my hands or at the ground or at a fence post and still catch everything happening in my peripheral vision. What I caught was this. He worked harder than he needed to, for a seasonal man. Most itinerant workers do the minimum to get through the season and collect their pay. Nico was one of those people who couldn't seem to help himself. If something needed doing, he did it. If something was broken that nobody had gotten around to fixing, he fixed it, not to impress anyone. I could tell because he didn't look around afterward to see if anyone had noticed. He just moved on to the next thing. He also talked. God, he talked. To the other workers, to the horses, to himself, when there was nobody else available. In English, and sometimes in what I assumed was Italian. Not full sentences, just fragments. The kind of muttering a person does when they're working through something in the language that comes most naturally to them. He had a voice that was easy to listen to. Not loud, not performing, just present, in the way that some voices are present. Filling a space without crowding it. I noticed things about him I didn't want to notice. The way he always rolled his sleeves to the same spot. 3 fingers above the wrist. The tattoo on his left wrist. A simple line drawing, a mountain silhouette. Small enough that you had to be close to see it clearly, the way he looked at things. Not just glanced, looked. Like he was making mental notes. Like the world around him was worth paying attention to. It was the 3rd week of September when we ended up working alone for the first time. Earl had sent the other 2 men into town for supplies, and there was a section of the north fence that needed checking after a small section of hillside shifted in the last rain. 2 miles of wire to inspect, just the 2 of us, in the kind of quiet that a working ranch has when all the noise of other people is removed. We walked the fence line for 20 minutes without speaking. I found 2 spots where the wire had come loose from the post and crouched to fix them. He handed me the tools before I asked for them, which meant he was paying attention to what I was doing, which I chose to find irritating rather than notice any other way. "You've been here 4 years?" he asked. I pulled the wire taut. "Yeah." "You like it?" I looked at him then. The question wasn't challenging. He was genuinely curious. That direct, uncomplicated kind of curious that some people have, and most people eventually train out of themselves. "It's good work," I said. He nodded like that was a complete answer. Maybe it was. "I've been in 8 states in 2 years, he said. Not bragging, just saying. Montana is the first one that made me feel like I should slow down. Why? He looked out over the hillside, the gold grass, the distant smudge of the bighorns against the sky, the enormous silence that lives between things out here. "It's the size of it," he said finally. "Most places, the landscape is background. Here it's present, like it's paying attention to you." I didn't have an answer for that. I went back to the wire. But I thought about it later, alone in my bunk, staring at the wood ceiling in the dark. He was right. Montana does pay attention. I should have paid more attention to what it was paying attention to. By October, we had developed a rhythm, not a friendship exactly. Or maybe it was. The kind that forms between people who work alongside each other without ever quite crossing into the territory of personal conversation. We moved around each other on the ranch with an ease that the other men noticed and didn't comment on, which in itself was a kind of comment. Ranchmen are like that. They notice everything and say nothing, and the saying nothing is always louder than anything they could say. I noticed things I didn't have names for. The way the air felt different in whatever room he was in. The way a silence between us had texture, weight, that silences with other people didn't have. The way my eyes found him without my permission. Across the yard, across the barn, without explanation or decision. Just there. I knew what it was. I'm not a man who lies to himself. I've spent too much time alone for that particular habit. I knew what it was, and I knew what it meant, and I knew exactly how much room there was in my life for it. None. None whatsoever. And then it was the 12th of October, and Earl sent us out to fix a section of fence 6 kilometers from the main property, and the sky turned the color of an old wound, and I ran out of arguments. Before I tell you what happened out there, I want to ask you something. Where are you listening to this from right now? Tell me in the comments, your city, your country. I want to know who's out here with me tonight, and with Connor and Nico, in the dark and the cold. Leave your city below. I'll be reading. The drive out to the fence took 20 minutes on a dirt road that was already showing signs of the freeze to come. The top layer of mud hardening at the edges, the tire tracks from earlier weeks preserved like fossils. The radio in the truck didn't work. It hadn't worked since before I arrived at the ranch. I'd never thought to fix it. Nico didn't seem to mind. He watched the landscape pass with that patient attention of his. One elbow on the door, and the silence between us in the cab was, I don't have a better word for it, companionable. The kind of silence you don't need to fill. We worked until the light started to go. The section of fence was more damaged than Earl had estimated. 3 posts needed to be reset, not just the wire repaired. And by the time we packed the tools back into the truck bed, the sky had made its transformation fully. That burning rust color I know so well. The temperature had dropped 8 degrees in an hour. I could feel it on the back of my neck, on the back of my hands. I reached behind the seat for the work gloves I kept there, and my hand found something else. A folded wool blanket. The kind ranches accumulate in truck cabs, the way they accumulate wire and twine. Always there, always forgotten. Old canvas backing, wool fill, smelling of cold air and years. We sat in the truck bed. I don't know who sat down first. Maybe neither of us decided. Maybe we just both stopped moving at the same moment, and the truck bed was where we were standing, and so that's where we sat. The blanket went across both of us without discussion. The kind of practical sharing that cold weather makes sensible. The kind that has nothing to do with anything else. Except that it did. He was close enough that I could feel the heat of his arm through the layer of flannel between us. Not touching, just present. A few centimeters. The kind of distance that has a sound. Nico was talking. He'd been telling me something about a ranch in New Mexico where he'd spent a summer. A story about a horse that had broken out of the paddock 3 times in a single week, always heading toward the same mesa. I'd been listening, which I don't always do, which he had noticed, I think, because he talked differently when he knew I was listening. More slowly, like he was enjoying the sound of his own voice less and the conversation more, and then he stopped. I don't know why he stopped. He was mid-sentence. Something about the 3rd time the horse got out. Something with a punchline I never heard. He stopped, and the silence arrived so suddenly it was almost physical. And I turned my head, because the silence coming from Nico was strange. The way a stopped clock is strange, the wrongness of it drawing attention to itself. He was looking at me. Not the way people look at each other in normal conversation. Not assessing, not waiting for me to say something. Just looking. With those dark eyes that already held too much, that stayed on things too long, that made people uncomfortable in a way that I had stopped finding uncomfortable weeks ago without quite noticing when. The sky above us was still burning. The cold was all around, under the blanket's edge, at the back of my throat when I breathed. The nearest living person was 6 kilometers away. I should have looked somewhere else. I have that skill. Looking away, looking down, looking at the thing that isn't the thing that matters. I've used it for 31 years. It's the most reliable skill I have. I didn't use it. I don't know how long we sat like that. Long enough that the color started going out of the sky. Long enough that the cold moved from sharp to settled. The kind of cold that stops announcing itself and simply becomes the air. Long enough that the distance between his arm and mine, barely there to begin with, somehow became even less. "Connor," he said. Just my name. Not a question, not a statement. Just the sound of it, in his voice, in that silence. Something happened in my chest. A settling. The way a building settles, not collapsing, not breaking. Just acknowledging gravity. Acknowledging that holding itself rigid was costing something. "Yeah," I said, not answering anything. Just present. He exhaled slowly. I felt it more than heard it. And then his hand moved, not toward me, just off his knee, open, resting on the truck bed between us. And Fasika inch from mine. Not a demand, an offer. I stared at his hand for a long time. I have spent the better part of my adult life not taking offers like that. Not because I didn't want them. Because wanting something that much was a vulnerability I couldn't afford, had never been able to afford, had learned at 17 in a concrete room with a metal cot that need was just another word for exposure. And exposure was just another word for getting hurt. So I kept my needs small and my walls high, and I was fine. I was always fine. His hand was an inch from mine on cold steel. He didn't push, didn't close the distance, didn't say anything else. Just left it there, open, without pressure, without a deadline, without the implicit expectation that I'd be a coward if I didn't reach back. That was what undid me. The absence of pressure. I had spent my whole life learning to resist being pushed toward things. Nobody had ever thought to simply wait. I moved my hand over his. His fingers closed around mine slowly, carefully, the way you close a hand around something you aren't sure won't break. We sat like that while the last color drained out of the Montana sky, his hand wrapped around mine, the blanket across both of us. Not speaking, not needing to. The wind moved through the dry grass. Far away, the first lights of the ranch came on. Small and gold and distant, like something from a different world. My hand felt like the only warm thing in the state. I should tell you something about who I was before Montana, before any of this. I should tell you because what happened with Nico isn't just a love story. It's a story about what happens to a person who has been carrying something alone for so long that they've forgotten it has weight. I grew up in a town 40 miles east of Billings. My father was a man of few words and fewer expressions, and my mother died when I was 9. And after that, the house got even quieter. I learned early that being unnoticed was the same as being safe. I learned that the fewer needs you had, the fewer ways there were to disappoint people, or to be disappointed. I was good at school in the way that gets you left alone. I was good at work in the way that earns you silence instead of conversation. At 17, I made a mistake. I won't dress it up in more than it was. A fight outside a bar in Billings, I was too young to be there, which I was too young to think about. A man twice my size and 3 times my years said something that I won't repeat, and I responded with my hands instead of my back. And the man ended up with a broken collarbone, and I ended up in juvenile detention for 8 months. 8 months is a long time when you're 17. What I learned in those 8 months, not from programs, not from counselors, but from the pure, extended, unavoidable experience of being in a cage, was that the only thing you can control is your reaction to things. That panic is a luxury. That stillness is its own kind of power. I learned to be quiet in a way that went deeper than just not talking. I learned to hold still. When I got out, I went to work on a ranch in Wyoming, then Idaho, then Montana. Ranching suited what I had become: physical labor, clear objectives, limited need for conversation, an environment where competence spoke louder than charm. I was good at the work. The work asked nothing of me that I couldn't give. What the work didn't ask for was the only thing that was getting harder to keep locked down. The awareness that I was going through my life without ever really landing. Never putting weight on anything. Never staying long enough to be known. Moving on before anyone could look close enough to see what was actually there. I was 31 years old. I had never once let anyone close enough to matter. And then I let Nico Moretti hold my hand in a truck bed in the Montana dark. And the thing I had been keeping locked down for 31 years hit the wall I'd built around it so hard I felt it in my spine. We drove back to the ranch in silence. A different silence than the one on the way out, charged, careful, the way air feels before lightning, all the small hairs on your arms standing up for no visible reason. He didn't say anything. I didn't say anything. But his knee touched mine in the cab, and neither of us moved away. The weeks that followed were, I don't know how to describe them accurately. Slow and fast at the same time, the way pain is. Every morning I woke up and talked myself into composure. Every day the composure lasted until I saw him. And then whatever I talked myself into quietly dissolved. And I went through my work with this warm, low-grade ache in my chest that I refused to name, even when I was alone. We found reasons to work together. I didn't examine the finding too closely. He brought me coffee in the morning without asking how I took it, which meant he'd been paying attention. He had, apparently, been paying attention to a lot of things. He knew which horses I worked with most. He knew I ate the same lunch every day, not because I liked it particularly, just because I'd never bothered to change it. He knew that I turned the radio on in the barn and off again when the other men came in, a habit I hadn't realized I had until he commented on it. "You don't like people knowing what you're listening to," he said. Not an accusation. An observation. I didn't answer. That's okay, he said. I'm not asking. Which was exactly the right thing to say. I don't know how he knew it, but he knew it. The evening after a long day mending the north pasture, we sat on the fence post by the east water tank as the sun went down, and he told me about his family in Portland, his grandmother from Sicily, the way she smelled of olive oil and rosemary, how she used to put both hands on his face when she talked to him, like she needed to hold him still to really see him, how he had moved through cities and seasons and strangers since she died, carrying her somewhere he couldn't quite locate. He talked about his ex. He didn't say it was a man. He didn't need to with me. 2 years, he said. And then he needed something I couldn't give him. Not because I didn't want to. I just didn't know how to be still. He paused. I'm learning. I thought about the hand in the truck bed, the way he'd left it open, patient, without demand. You're doing all right? I said. He looked at me sideways, smiled. Not the easy smile he wore with the others. Something quieter, something he was less careful with. God help me. I wanted to be in the same room as that smile for the rest of my life. And then things got complicated. I should have known they would. Nothing that feels like that is allowed to stay uncomplicated. There's a tax on warmth out here. There always has been. It started with looks. Wade and Pete, the 2 other full-time ranch hands, had been watching us. Not in the obvious way that signals coming confrontation, but in the quiet way that is somehow worse. The conversations that stop when you enter a room, the small recalibrations of posture, the absence of the kind of easy banter that used to flow between all of us like something that cost nothing. At the bar in town on a Friday night, the one with the sticky floors and the mounted elk head above the pool table, I heard my name from 2 stools down in a tone of voice that I recognized. I've been hearing that tone of voice on and off for 14 years. I've learned to recognize it the way you learn to recognize weather. I didn't look up. I finished my drink. I left. Nico was outside, leaning against the wall, looking up at the sky the way he always looked at things. He'd stepped out earlier, and I hadn't asked why. You heard, I said. I heard, he said. No elaboration, no comfort, just acknowledgement. Which was what I needed, actually. We walked to the truck, not touching, not speaking. But his shoulder was close enough to mine that the warmth of it was present. A steady thing, like a fire in the next room. Does it bother you? He asked when we were in the cab. I considered the question with the seriousness it deserved. Does it bother me? I've been navigating this since I was 17. I know the math, when to push, when to absorb, when to let something pass because the cost of addressing it exceeds the cost of carrying it. I know the weather of it. It bothers me that you have to deal with it, I said. He was quiet for a moment. Then, I've been dealing with it my whole life, Connor. I chose to stop hiding. That's a different kind of dealing. He paused. I'm asking about you. I started the truck. I'll figure it out, I said. I felt him looking at me. I kept my eyes on the road. You always say that, he said. Like figuring things out alone is the only option. I didn't answer, because he was right, and I didn't have anything useful to say in response to being right. And I am not the kind of man who speaks when he doesn't have anything useful to say. But I thought about it for a long time after, in the dark of my bunk. The complication I hadn't seen coming had a name I already knew. Earl Halverson had been looking at me differently for the past week. Nothing you could call him on. Earl wasn't a man you could call on anything, which was part of what made him dangerous in the particular way that quiet authority is dangerous. He ran the ranch with efficiency and minimal speech and the kind of iron consistency that made people feel lucky to work for him. He'd given me 4 years of fair pay and fair treatment, and I had been grateful for it. But there was something behind his eyes when he looked at me now that I didn't recognize. And because I couldn't recognize it, I couldn't address it. And because I couldn't address it, it sat at the bottom of my stomach like a stone. What I didn't know, what I couldn't know yet, was that Earl Halverson had never been a stranger to me. Not really. He had just been a stranger to the version of me that arrived in Billings at 27 with a clean record and 4 years of Wyoming ranching on my resume. The me before that, the me from before Wyoming, before Idaho, the 17-year-old in the detention cell. That version of me, Earl knew. I didn't know that yet. I was about to. The morning he called me into his office, the sky was flat and gray, and the first real smell of winter was in the air. That iron, empty smell. Like the world had taken a breath and held it. He was sitting behind his desk. A practical desk, working man's desk, scratched along one edge from the time he'd moved it himself without help. He had a cup of coffee and a look I couldn't read. "Close the door," he said. I closed it. He didn't offer me a chair, which meant this was short, or it was the kind of conversation that shouldn't get comfortable. I stood. "I'm going to ask you something," he said, "and I want a straight answer." "All right. How long are you planning to keep the Moretti boy around?" The question landed wrong. Everything about it landed wrong. The phrasing, the tone, the implication embedded in the casualness of it. I felt my jaw tighten. "That's not my decision," I said. "He's a ranch employee." "I'm talking about the other thing, Connor." He was looking at me steadily. Not hostile, exactly. Something older than hostility. Something more like certainty. The certainty of a man who has made up his mind. I held his gaze. "I don't know what you mean." "Yes, you do?" The room was very quiet. Outside, one of the horses made a sound. Short, low, the sound of unease. Earl leaned back in his chair. "I've been fair to you," he said. 4 years, no problems, fair wages, and I kept my mouth shut about things I could have spoken up about. He paused. "I'm asking for the same courtesy. Keep it quiet. Don't make it a thing. The boys are getting edgy, and I don't need that in the middle of the season." It was a reasonable request, framed in the language of pragmatism. It was also something else entirely. I know what it's like to be told your life needs to be smaller so other people can be comfortable. I have been told this in many different ways, and I recognize all of them. I nodded, not agreement, just acknowledgement. "Thanks for the conversation," I said, and left. I stood outside in the cold for a long time, breathing through it. Here is the thing about Earl Halverson that I didn't know yet. The reason he spoke with such certainty, the reason he looked at me with that particular expression of established authority, was not just the routine conservatism of a Montana ranch owner. It was something more specific than that, more personal, more rooted in history. He knew me, not the me standing in his office at 31, the other me, the 17-year-old me, in a detention facility in Billings, facing a judge, while a man named Earl Halverson sat in the room and spoke as a witness for the prosecution. I didn't know it yet. I would. And when I did, everything I thought I understood about the 4 years I'd spent on this land, about the fairness, about the quiet, about the particular quality of Earl's silences, would rearrange itself into a different shape entirely. But that night, I didn't know any of it. That night I found Nico in the barn, making notes in the margins of a map he'd spread across a hay bale. His topographic map of Montana, covered in his handwriting, in that small, careful script I'd seen over his shoulder once, and felt something strange about. He was writing something in the margin near the Billings region. I didn't look at what it said. I just stood in the doorway. He looked up and saw my face. He folded the map carefully, put it in his back pocket, and stood. He didn't ask what happened. He walked across the barn toward me and stopped when we were close. Close enough that the warmth was there, that particular warmth that only existed in this specific 6 inches of air. And he looked at me with those dark eyes that held everything steady. "Hey," he said. "Hey," I said. And for the first time in 31 years, that was enough. We stood there in the barn, and I let him close the last few centimeters between us. And I put my forehead against his, just that. Foreheads touching, eyes closed, breathing each other's air in the dark of the barn, with the horses moving softly around us, and the Montana cold held back by four walls, and the shared warmth of two people deciding to stop pretending they weren't who they were. He brought a hand up to the back of my neck. Careful, the way he was always careful with me. Like he understood without being told that I needed approach without aggression, warmth without demand. "I've got you," he said quietly. I had not been told that by anyone in a very long time. I didn't say anything, but I didn't move away. And for that moment, just that moment, the weight I'd been carrying since I was 17 years old was lighter. Not gone, not resolved. The complications outside that barn were still real. Earl's office was still real. The looks and the silences and the particular texture of danger in a town like this were still real. But lighter. For the first time in a long time. Lighter. And then, 3 days later, Nico got a letter. Not a letter, technically. An email he printed out and read twice before folding it and putting it in his shirt pocket. And then walked around for the rest of the day, with that particular stillness that meant he was processing something large. He told me that evening, sitting on the fence by the water tank, where we'd taken to meeting after supper. The offer was from a farm in Oahu, Hawaii. Full-time position, year-round climate. Different kind of work, vegetables and tropical, fruit rather than cattle. But honest work, good pay. More than good, actually. The kind of pay that a man who has been living season to season for 2 years notices. He told me all of this in a steady voice. He told me it was a good offer. He told me he had until the end of the month to decide. And then he said, "I want you to come with me." The Montana sky above us was doing that thing it does in October, holding on to the last bit of color too long, like it knows what's coming and isn't ready, like it's reluctant. I understood the sky. "I want you to come with me." 6 words, and the entire architecture of my 31 years rearranged itself around them. Every wall I had built, every carefully maintained distance, every decision to move on before being moved on, to leave before being left, to need nothing so that losing nothing was always an option. All of it responding to 6 words. He wasn't pressuring me. He never pressured. He'd said it the same way he'd left his hand open on the truck bed in October. An offer, not a demand. Available, not insistent. The absence of pressure that I had never known how to defend against. I looked at the bighorns in the distance, dark shapes against the last of the light. I had come to Montana to disappear, to work and to be uncomplicated and to ask nothing of a life that had already asked too much of me. And here, somehow, was a man who had found me anyway. Here was the question I'd never let myself ask. Did I believe I deserved to be found? I didn't answer him that night. He didn't push. He just sat beside me while the sky went dark, close enough that our arms touched through our jackets, and the wind moved through the dry grass, and Montana, vast and implacable and ancient, paid attention to both of us. I didn't have an answer yet, but for the first time in my life, I had the question. And that was something. If you're here, you already know Connor. You already know what it cost him to move that hand. You already know that some people spend half their lives building walls so precise, so load-bearing, so integrated into who they are, that when something finally gets through, it doesn't feel like breakthrough. It feels like structural failure. It feels like falling. This is what happens when Connor Kelly falls. He didn't sleep that night. That was nothing new. I've never been a reliable sleeper. Too much time spent in places where sleep was something you did with half your brain still on watch. But this was different. This wasn't the vigilance of old habit. This was something more like what I imagine it feels like to be a compass too close to a magnet. Disoriented, spinning, unable to locate north. I want you to come with me. 6 words that had apparently decided they lived in my chest now. Rent-free, showing up every time I closed my eyes. I lay on my bunk and I stared at the ceiling. And I did what I always do when something is too large to look at directly. I broke it into parts, smaller pieces, manageable questions. Did I want to go? Yes. Without any deliberation, yes. That was the most terrifying thing I had ever discovered about myself. And I had discovered some genuinely terrifying things. The wanting was clean and immediate and had no arguments in it. Of course I wanted to go. I wanted to go anywhere Nico Moretti was going. I had wanted that for weeks and had refused to call it by its name until the name became unavoidable. Was wanting enough? And here is where I always come off the rails. Here is where Connor Kelly, who is reliable about most things, becomes unreliable. Because I know, I have always known, that wanting is the beginning of something, not the guarantee of it. I have wanted things in my life. I wanted my mother not to die. I wanted my father to look at me like I was a person and not an obligation. I wanted to not be 17 in a detention cell, lying on a cot in the dark, understanding for the first time that the world would move forward without me and nobody would pause to notice. Want is not a plan. Want is not a warranty. Want is just want. Did I believe it would last? That was the real question. The one underneath all the others. Not whether Nico would stay. I believed he would. I had watched him closely enough to know that his constancy was real, not performance. His tenderness didn't come with conditions. He wasn't offering me Hawaii as a gesture. He was offering it the way he offered everything. Completely, without calculation, with that open hand. The question was whether I believed I was the kind of person who got to have that. I was still working on the answer at 3 a.m. when I heard something that pulled me out of my own head entirely. Voices. Outside near the barn. Low voices. The kind that people use when they don't want to be heard, which always makes them more audible than normal speech to anyone paying attention. I sat up, listened. 2 voices. And I knew both of them, Wade and Pete. And then a third voice, quieter, that I recognized with a drop in my stomach. Earl. I didn't hear words. I heard tone. And tone, out here at 3 a.m, is information enough. I put my boots on. I want to say I went out there because I had a plan. I didn't. I went out there because Nico was in the bunk room on the other side of the barn. And the 3 voices were between me and him, and the mathematics of that were unacceptable. The cold hit me before I'd taken 3 steps outside. The kind of October cold that isn't playing, the sky entirely clear, the stars enormous and indifferent, the ground already showing the glitter of frost on the grass. My breath came out in a plume and vanished. They were by the fence near the barn entrance. Wade with his arms crossed, Pete a step behind him, and Earl standing slightly apart with his hands in his jacket pockets. They saw me before I spoke. Nobody looked surprised. Connor. Earl's voice was even. Thought you'd be asleep. Thought I'd take a walk, I said. A silence, the kind with mass. Wade said something then that I won't repeat here. It wasn't original. These things never are. It was the kind of thing that gets said in towns like this, in nights like this, and has been said for longer than any of us have been alive. Compact and ugly and designed to locate you below the speaker, to make sure you understand where you stand, I stood still. I am very good at standing still. That's enough, Earl said. Not to me. To Wade. And Wade, who understood authority, went quiet. Earl looked at me. In the moonlight, his face was unreadable, which was normal for Earl. What wasn't normal was the slight shift in his jaw, a tension, something working there, something that had nothing to do with the present moment. "Go back inside, Connor," he said. "Not yet," I said. He held my gaze for a long moment. "Son, don't." The word came out flat, without heat. "Don't call me that." Something passed across his face. I couldn't name it then. Later, I would have a name for it. But in that moment, it just looked like a man looking at something he'd been trying not to look at for a long time. "Go inside," he said again. Quieter. I went inside. But I didn't go to my bunk. I went to the other side of the barn. I knocked twice on the bunk room door, our signal, 2 knocks, which we had developed without ever discussing it. The way you develop things with a person you've been paying close attention to. The door opened. Nico stood in the doorway, in the half-dark, barefoot, in the worn gray t-shirt he slept in. And he read my face in about 2 seconds, because he had, apparently, become fluent in my face. He stepped back and let me in without asking anything. I sat on the edge of his cot, and he sat across from me on the small wooden chair, and I told him what had happened. Not all of it. I didn't have all of it yet. But what I'd heard, what had been said, the texture of Earl's face in the moonlight. He listened without interrupting. This is one of the things I had come to understand about Nico Moretti. His listening was active, intentional, the whole of his attention brought to bear on you in a way that made you feel, witnessed, seen, not analyzed, just seen. When I finished, he was quiet for a moment. "Are you okay?" he asked. Not, "What does this mean for us?" Not, "Should we leave?" Just, "Are you okay?" "I don't know," I said, which was true, and the truest thing I could offer. He nodded. Then he reached forward and wrapped a hand around my wrist. Not my hand this time, the wrist, the way you hold on to something that might need steadying. And held it. We sat like that for a long time. The cold around the barn, the stars outside, and the warm circle of his hand around my wrist as an anchor. "I'm not going to pretend this is simple," he said finally. "It isn't. But I meant what I said, Connor. Hawaii isn't contingent on anything. I'm not making a deal." He paused. "I'm just saying that wherever I go next, I'd like you with me, if you want to be." He looked at me steadily. "And if you don't, if you need to stay or go somewhere else, or if this isn't what you want, I will deal with that. I'm not going to fall apart." I looked at him. This man, this absurd, warm, map-collecting, constantly talking, permanently curious man, who had arrived in a truck with a duffel bag and absolutely no appropriate clothing for a Montana winter, and had proceeded to completely dismantle 31 years of careful architecture without apparently breaking a sweat. "Why aren't you afraid of any of this?" I asked. He thought about it honestly, which was something he always did. "I am afraid of some of it," he said. "I'm afraid that you'll decide it's not worth it. I'm afraid that I'll push too hard and you'll close back up." He paused. "But the situation itself, the difficulty of it, the uncertainty, that doesn't scare me." He considered. "I think I spent so long running that I ran out of places to run to. And when I stopped, I realized I'd been using the running to avoid feeling things. And feeling things is terrifying. But it's also the point. It's actually the point." He was looking at his own hand around my wrist when he said that. Then he looked up. "You've been holding things so carefully for so long," he said. "So carefully. And I wonder what would happen if you put some of it down." The barn was very quiet. "It might break," I said. "Or it might not," he said. "Or it might break, and that might be okay." I looked at him for a long time. Then, slowly, I leaned forward and kissed him. Not the tense, suspended contact of the truck bed. Not a proximity that stops short of arrival. A kiss. Deliberate. Decided. Both hands coming up to hold his face the way he deserved to be held. Like something real. Like something chosen. Not stumbled into but arrived at after the longest walk of my life. He made a small sound. Something that wasn't quite a word. His hands came up and found my shoulders and held on, not pulling, just present, the way he was always present. We stayed there in the half-dark of the barn bunk room, and for the first time in as long as I could remember, the thing in my chest that was always braced for impact, the thing that had been braced since I was 9 years old, since I was 17, since every morning of 4 years in Montana, relaxed, not gone, not resolved, just resting. He pulled back first, just a little, just enough to look at me. His forehead came down against mine. That gesture again, the one he had given me in the barn weeks ago, the one that had undone me the first time and undone me again now in a completely different direction. His breathing was uneven. Mine was worse. "Hi," he said. "Hi," I said. That was... He stopped. Started again. "Connor." "Yeah. I've been wanting to do that since September 14th. I pulled back far enough to look at him. "September 14th? That's the day you arrived." "It was a very compelling first impression," he said. And there was that smile. Not the easy public one, the real one, the one without any distance in it. And I understood, in a way I couldn't have predicted and couldn't quite explain, that I was in the process of losing something I had spent 31 years defending, and that I was not going to fight it. I brought him back in. No urgency, no performance, just the warmth of it. The simple, devastating warmth of being close to someone who has chosen you specifically, who has been paying attention long enough to know what they're choosing. His hands were in my hair. My hands were around his back, pulling him in without thinking about it, the way you pull in something. You've been holding at arm's length for too long. Outside the barn, Montana was cold and vast and entirely indifferent. Inside, we were the only warm thing in the state. This is what I know now, and didn't know then. The bravest thing is not the grand gesture. It's not the dramatic declaration. It's the small act of letting yourself be held. The willingness to stop performing armor for 5 minutes and just be there in the dark with someone who has been paying attention. That was the bravest thing I had ever done. It was also the night everything else started to come apart. Because the next morning, Earl Halverson asked to speak with me again. And this time, he closed the door and didn't look at his desk and said the thing he had apparently been carrying for 4 years. "I know who you are, Connor." I said nothing. Not who you are now. Who you were. He pulled a manila folder from the desk drawer. I recognized the font on the cover before he opened it, the particular bureaucratic formatting of juvenile court records. He'd had a copy the whole time. Had it when he hired me. Had it when he shook my hand. Had it through 4 years of fair wages and fair work and whatever he thought that constituted between us. He set it on the desk and pushed it toward me. Not open, just there. "I was in that courtroom," he said. "You probably don't remember me." "I remember everyone in that courtroom." He absorbed that. "I spoke for the prosecution," he said. "You probably know that too." "I know." A silence. Then, I was the one who recommended they add the additional months. The room was absolutely still. I had wondered for years who had done that. The judge had mentioned a recommendation from a character witness at sentencing. I had spent 8 months trying to put a face to that recommendation, to make it specific, to understand what kind of man makes that kind of decision about a 17-year-old who has never been in trouble before. And I had spent 4 years, apparently, working for him. Why? I asked. He looked tired. Genuinely, deeply tired. Not the tiredness of a long day, but the tiredness of a long time. The man you hurt. He worked for my brother. He paused. I felt responsible. I thought if you had more time, you'd... He stopped. Come out different, I said. He held my gaze. Yes. I thought about the 8 months. The concrete and the metal cot and the particular quality of fluorescent light in a room with no windows. I thought about the 17-year-old I was when I went in and the person who came out on the other side. Quieter, stiller, armored in ways that had served me and cost me in equal measure. Did it work? I asked. He didn't answer, which was its own answer. I took the folder off the desk and put it under my arm. He didn't stop me. I'm going to finish out the week, I said. And then I'm done here. Connor, I'm not angry, I said. And the strange thing was, I wasn't. I had expected to be. I had expected to feel the old burning thing, the one that had gotten me into that courtroom in the first place. Instead, what I felt was clarifying, like a decision making itself. I'm not angry, I said again. I just don't want to work here anymore. He nodded. The tiredness in his face was so complete, it had become a kind of honesty. For what it's worth, he said as I reached for the door, you turned out all right. I thought about Nico in the doorway of the barn bunk room, the hand around my wrist, the simplest, steadiest thing I had ever felt. Yeah, I said. I think I did. The week that followed was the clearest of my life. Clarity is like that. It arrives late, and when it does, it's almost embarrassing in its simplicity, the way difficult problems sometimes resolve into obvious solutions once you stop trying to force them. I told Nico about Earl, all of it. I told him about the courtroom, the 8 months, the 17-year-old I was, the folder with its bureaucratic typeface. I told him in pieces, over 2 evenings, sitting on the frost-hard ground by the east pasture fence, with our backs against the post. And he listened the way he always listened. Completely, quietly, without the small performances of sympathy that less genuine people offer. He didn't say, I'm sorry it happened. He didn't say, that's terrible. He said, thank you for telling me. 3 of the most useful words I have ever heard. Because that's what the telling was. A thank you was the right response. Not pity, not absolution. Just the acknowledgement that what I had handed him was real, and that he received it. The second evening was harder. The second evening was the part I hadn't told anyone. Not the fact of the detention, which I had disclosed to no one, but which at least had the clean shape of an event. A thing that happened and ended. The second evening was about the 8 months themselves. What they had made of me. The specific grammar of learning to be still when every instinct said fight. And what it cost to learn that. And what I had paid for it every day since. In the currency of closed doors and held distances and the particular loneliness of a man who has made himself too small to be hurt. Nico sat beside me and let me talk until I ran out of words. Which took a long time, because once I started, I apparently had more of them than I thought. The cold was serious now. November cold, the real thing. The frost making the grass creak underfoot when you shifted your weight. We were close enough that our shoulders pressed together and neither of us moved away. When I finally went quiet, he didn't say anything for a while. He was looking at the dark line of the bighorns against the sky, those patient, ancient shapes, unmoving. "My grandfather," he said finally, "used to say that the mountain doesn't apologize for being hard to climb. It just stands there. And you either go up it or you don't." He paused. I used to think that was a very cold thing to say. I've been thinking lately that it might be one of the kindest. I looked at him. "You went up it," he said simply. "Everything you just told me. That's a man who went up something very hard with no rope and made it anyway. And now..." He turned to look at me, and in the moonlight, his face was open and certain and utterly without reservation. "And now you're here, and I'm here. And maybe that's what it was all for." I held his gaze. "That's a very Italian way to think about things," I said. He laughed. "My grandmother would be flattered." I kissed him then. Not carefully, not tentatively. The way you kiss someone when careful and tentative are no longer the tools required. "Does it change anything?" I asked. "For you?" He gave me a look of such patient, gentle incredulity that I almost laughed. "Connor," he said. "I know," I said. "No," he said. "I don't think you do. Let me say it clearly." He turned to face me on the hard ground, both hands coming around to hold mine in that direct, unashamed way of his. "You were 17 years old. You did something stupid and got punished too harshly for it. And then you spent the next 14 years making yourself smaller so it would never happen again. And the only thing I think about when you tell me that story is how much I want to give you back the space you spent all that time taking up less of." I stared at him. "You're a lot," I said. My voice came out rougher than I intended. "I know," he said. "You've been patient with me about it." The laugh that came out of me was unfamiliar, real and sudden and completely without effort, the kind of laugh that a body produces when it is genuinely surprised by joy. I hadn't heard that sound from myself in a long time. He looked delighted, like my laugh was a prize. "There you are," he said softly. I pulled him forward by the front of his jacket and kissed him again, in broad daylight in the open air, with the bighorns on the horizon and the frost in the grass and Montana watching. Because Montana always watches. And I did not care who could see. For the first time in 14 years, I did not care who could see. The last 3 days on the Halverson Ranch were quiet in the way that resolutions are quiet. Not empty, but settled. Wade and Pete kept their distance. Earl kept his. The horses, the ones that I had worked with all season, the ones that Earl's other hands called difficult, and that I had spent mornings with in the cold blue light before anyone else was up. Those I said goodbye to properly. One by one, a hand on the neck. The particular stillness I had learned to offer them and that they had learned to trust. There's a sorrel mare named Dispatch who had been impossible to approach when I arrived 4 years ago. She would go to nobody. Cornered herself against the far wall of her stall and stood there with her neck arched, all tension and terror. It had taken me 3 months of slow mornings to earn 5 minutes with her. I put my hand against her neck on the last morning and she didn't move. Just stood. That particular quiet that means trust. "Good girl," I said. "You're going to be all right." I meant it for her. I also meant it for myself. Nico found me there. He always found me without being told where I was. A talent he had that I had stopped trying to explain. He leaned on the stall door and watched me with the mare and didn't say anything for a while. "Ready?" he said eventually. I thought about the question. Ready. 4 years of my life in this barn, this land, this particular quality of sky. The first place I had ever stayed long enough to feel the specific weight of it. The first place I had allowed myself to be known. Not completely, not until recently, but known in the partial way of small consistencies, of patterns noticed, of a man who turned the radio on and off in a way that someone else had paid attention to. Montana had taught me things I couldn't have learned anywhere else, including what it felt like to finally, after a very long time, let someone in. "Yeah," I said. "Ready." We left on a Thursday morning, the truck loaded with 2 men's worth of not very much. Nico drove. He drives the way he exists, with confidence and without urgency. Like wherever he's going is worth getting to, and no amount of rushing will make it more so. I watched the Halverson property get small in the side mirror and then disappear behind the first long curve of the road. I didn't look for it after it was gone. Some things deserve a clean exit. What I did look at, the sky, that Montana sky that I had been living under for 4 years, that had watched everything, the work, the silence, the accumulation of seasons, the arrival of 1 man in September and the departure of 2 in November. It was fully winter now, the blue of it paler, the light thin and cold and direct. No ambiguity in it, just clarity. I thought about the horses, about dispatch and the 3 months it had taken to earn 5 minutes with her, and the way she'd stood still for my hand on her last morning. About the way trust is built in increments so small you can miss them individually. But one day you turn around, and there it is, solid, almost surprising in its solidity, and you think, when did that happen? I thought about Earl. I thought about him for a long time, actually, in the quiet of the cab. Not with anger. I had told him I wasn't angry, and I had meant it, which had surprised me as much as it seemed to surprise him. What I felt about Earl Halverson was something more complicated than anger, something that had no clean name. Grief, maybe, for a version of things that had never existed. The 4 years in which I had understood myself to be working for a fair man in a fair arrangement, now revised into something else. Something more tangled, more historically weighted, more human in its messiness. He had done a wrong thing to a 17-year-old and then spent 4 years in a complicated relationship with his own culpability. I understood that. I didn't excuse it, but I understood it. That's what 31 years teaches you, eventually, if you're paying attention. That most people are not villains. They're just people with unresolved things, making decisions based on what they're carrying. And sometimes those decisions land on someone else and leave marks. And the marks are real. And the people are also real. And you can hold both of those truths without letting either one cancel the other out. I was learning to hold things like that. Nico had something to do with that. We were an hour out of Billings, heading toward the airport in Missoula, when Nico reached across the seat and took my hand. Not dramatically, just took it, the way you take the hand of someone whose hand you intend to keep taking, set both our hands, set, on his thigh and went back to watching the road. I looked out the window at Montana going past. The plains, enormous and gold. The wind moving through the grass in long, slow waves. The sky, still that enormous sky, pale blue now in the November morning. The kind of sky that contains everything. "Tell me something," I said. "Anything," he said. "The map, your Montana map. What did you write about me?" He was quiet for a moment. Then a small smile moved across his face. Which entry? He said. How many are there? The smile got wider. September 14th. Green eyes. Doesn't waste words. Fixed the fence by Section 3 without being asked. He paused. September 29th. Turned the radio off when Pete came in. Looked at me once across the barn when he thought I wasn't looking. I was looking. Another pause. October 3rd. He laughed at something the horse did. First time I heard him laugh. This is a problem. My chest felt full. October 12th. He said, softer. Now. Fence line. Shared blanket. He held my hand. I'm in serious trouble. I looked at him. November 9th, he said. Last note. Just 2 words. What 2 words? He glanced at me. Those dark eyes, that particular steadiness, that open, unashamed warmth that had been dismantling me for 2 months. Worth it, he said. I held his hand a little tighter. Outside, Montana kept going. Wide and cold and magnificent. Indifferent in the way that only very large things can be indifferent, in the way that makes human warmth more necessary and more remarkable by comparison. I have lived my life in the margins of the landscape. Small, careful, taking up as little space as possible so there would be less of me to damage. I don't think I'm going to do that anymore. It is a long way from Montana to Hawaii. It is a long way from a detention cell to a truck cab on a November morning, holding someone's hand in the early light, watching the world go past at 60 miles an hour with the particular feeling of a man who has made a decision and means it. I don't know what Hawaii will be. I don't know if the work will suit me or if I'll miss the cattle, or if the absence of snow will feel like relief or loss. I don't know what it looks like, the life I'm heading toward. I have never been good at imagining futures. They have always felt like presumption. But I know this. There will be a man in that future who keeps topographic maps with notes in the margins, who talks to horses and to himself and to the air when there is nobody else available, who holds things open and patient instead of forcing them, who said worth it on a map and meant it. And I, Connor Kelly, 31 years old, built by all the wrong things into something that turned out, somehow, to be able to love. I am going to try. That is new for me. That is perhaps the most radical thing I have ever done. Not the fighting or the working or the years of silence. Not the survival, which was impressive but ultimately just stubbornness dressed up as strength. The trying. The decision to show up for something without a guarantee. The willingness to be in the photograph even when you don't know what the photograph will show. We stopped for coffee at a gas station just past Livingston. Nico came back with 2 cups and one of those packaged cinnamon rolls that taste like they were made in a factory that has never been anywhere near cinnamon. He handed it to me with such transparent pleasure in the giving of it that I took it and ate the whole thing and didn't tell him how bad it was. He was watching me when I finished it. That small smile, the one he kept for me. You hated that, he said. It was fine, I said. It absolutely was not fine. He was grinning now. You have a face, Connor. You have a face, and it's extremely communicative when you're not paying attention. I have no idea what you're talking about. You made the same face the horse makes when she smells. Something wrong, he said. Your nostrils did a thing. My nostrils did not do a thing. He was laughing now, fully, openly laughing, and the sound of it in the small cab of the truck was, I want to find a better word. But the one that keeps arriving is warm. Just warm. The warmth that comes from being known and liked at the same time, simultaneously, with no gap between them. They absolutely did a thing, he said. I have been watching your face for 2 months. Your nostrils are extremely expressive when you think nobody is looking. This is not a serious conversation. It is the most serious conversation I have ever had, he said. Connor, I studied your face, the jaw especially. You hold everything in your jaw. When something bothers you, the jaw tightens about 30 seconds before anything else reacts, which means I always know when you're troubled versus performing being fine. I looked at him. He met my gaze with complete equanimity. You are the strangest person I have ever met, I said. Probably, he agreed. Is that going to be a problem? And another laugh came out of me, real and sudden, the kind that a body produces when it's genuinely surprised by joy. I hadn't heard that sound from myself in a long time. He looked delighted, like my laugh was a prize he'd been working toward. There you are, he said softly. I reached over and put my hand on the back of his neck, then pulled him sideways and kissed his temple. Not a romantic gesture exactly. Something simpler than that. Something more like the way you touch something you want to keep. And he went very still for a moment, in that way he had when he was being moved and trying not to show it. We sat in that parking lot longer than we needed to, not saying much. The Montana morning around us, thin winter light, trucks going past, the smell of cold and diesel, and something wide and clean underneath both. I thought about the first morning I'd spent in Billings, 4 years ago, arriving with not much and no particular plan, and the very deliberate intention of being nobody's person and nobody's problem. I had not expected this. You can't expect this, I think. You can't plan for the person who shows up with the wrong jacket and the right kind of patience and simply waits. Simply leaves their hand open. Simply says your name like it's enough. It turns out it's enough. I'm going to do this for the rest of my life, he said eventually. I'm just going to figure out what you hate and hand it to you and watch your nostrils. That's a terrible life plan, I said. I've had worse, he said. I looked at him. He looked back. And we drove toward whatever was next, together, in the morning light. There is a particular kind of love that doesn't announce itself. It doesn't arrive in grand gestures or dramatic declarations. It arrives in small things, a hand left open on a cold truck bed, a cup of coffee without having to ask, 2 knocks on a barn door at 3 in the morning, a map covered in careful notes with a name appearing on 3 different pages. It arrives in the willingness to wait. Connor Kelly spent 31 years being very good at not needing anything. And then a man from Portland arrived in September with a jacket too thin for the weather and a habit of looking too long at things, and quietly, patiently, without making a demand, showed him that need isn't the same as weakness, that wanting isn't the same as losing, that some walls, when they finally come down, don't leave rubble. They leave room. If this story found you where you needed it, if Connor and Nico stayed with you, I want you to know. Thank you for being here. These stories exist because you believe in them, because you show up for them. This is where simple love lives, not in the easy places, not in the uncomplicated ones, in the cold and the distance, and the years we spent telling ourselves we were fine, in the moment we finally stop saying that. Thank you for all of it.
Enjoyed this story? Good, because I have so much more to tell you, but those other ones I can't put out here. It's not for everyone. It's for those who really want to go deep. On my Patreon, the stories are more intense, more free, more real. No censorship, no filter, no limitations. It's the place where I can truly explore everything these characters live, feel, and desire. Things that don't make it out here. And trust me, there's a lot waiting for you. And it's not just content, it's a community. A closed space for those who want real representation, who want to support the LGBTQ+ cause and have access to benefits nobody else has. Early content, behind the scenes, stories only members get to know, and a group of people who think just like you. A place where we can talk about everything, without judgment, without limits. There are already a lot of people inside following stories you don't even know exist yet. And every month, there's something new coming. Getting in is easy. Point your phone camera at the QR code on screen right now, or use the link in the first pinned comment down below or in the video description. In less than 2 minutes, you're already part of it. See you on the other side.